The British Board of Film Censors wants you to know that this opening is to certify that this Blackmail podcast has been passed for public exhibition to adult audiences. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Theater of the Golden Silence podcast. Your tickets have been taken, and our trustworthy ushers are leading you to your seats for this special, once-a-year holiday edition of the show. What holiday is the show celebrating, you may ask? Very good question, all of you listeners out there. That is a question that will be answered in short order. But before we begin the cinematic celebrations, we want to remind you, as always, to follow Golden Silence Cast on Instagram for the most up-to-date information on our little podcast. And for all of you tweeters out on the Twitter, just punch in at Golden Silence number in the number 1, or just search for Golden Silence Cast. There we have fun adventures all throughout the world of film and the occasional detour. We give updates on the podcast, post cool silent film related stories, and other fun bits of classic cinema of all sorts. Also, if you're listening to this program on Apple iTunes or Apple Podcast, or any other service that allows for ratings and reviews, please leave a review of the Golden Silence podcast. As those numbers go up, so does the visibility of the show. As more people see us, more people can join our fun little parties. We are still at 4 reviews at the moment, and would love to see that number move on up. As always, we super appreciate your support here at the Golden Silence podcast and look forward to bringing you tons and tons more cool stuff. Earlier, I had mentioned this bonus episode being released as a special holiday edition of our normal show, and you find folks are probably wondering what holiday it could be. In case you were unaware, September 29th, 2021 is the first ever National Silent Movie Day. Awesome, right? And we would be remiss and possibly in violation of some sort of silent film podcast bylaw by not acknowledging this special event. National Silent Movie Day is the result of a collaboration between film archivists that seek to raise awareness of the art of silent film. The official press release for the event states, "This new day of recognition celebrates silent films, their history, and the urgent need to preserve them. Approximately 80% of all silent films have been lost forever because they were printed on highly flammable nitrate film stock. Theaters and studios often destroyed or reclaimed silver content from the film prints after their theatrical runs were completed. Plus, nitrate film decays over time. So archives around the world are in a race against time to preserve what few silent films that still exist." I have mentioned a number of times on this show the importance of these movies and how they need to be protected, and how film preservation is a crazy, crazy business filled oftentimes with lucky breaks and passionate cinephiles. And any event that helps draw attention to this sector of the film world, it's all right with me. One of the day's organizers, Chad Hunter, explains, "For every silent film audiences might recognize today, there are hundreds that are on the verge of waiting to be discovered or in jeopardy of disintegrating into dust and being lost for good." According to Pittsburgh Magazine's own writer Chad Collier, he writes, "Chad Hunter is the executive director of Video Trust, an organization of media librarians, as well as the director of the Pittsburgh Silent Film Society. Nearly 20 years ago, he launched Home Movie Day. The periodic events were basically a day for archivists to get together and invite the public to bring their home movies to their local archive or museum," he says. "It was a niche interest, but popular. The idea spread, and home movie days have now taken place in more than 100 cities around the world. Also, I have to say I'm a bit geographically biased with this event. Throughout these episodes, I tend to shout out the city of Pittsburgh whenever I can, as it is the location of the Golden Silence home offices. And I am proud to say that the leader of this National Silent Movie Day, of this special holiday, is a black and gold through and through Pittsburgher. Now, National Silent Movie Day has been established through the efforts of archivist Chad Hunter, executive director of the Video Trust and director of the Pittsburgh Silent Film Society, and the real-life Pittsburgher I was talking about a second ago, Brandy B. Cox, a senior film archivist at the Academy Film Archive, and Stephen K. Hill, motion picture archivist at the UCLA Film and Television Archive. So you know this operation is put on by passionate folks with a hankering for film preservation. And you know it's the real deal when big names and big events start taking notice. In a quote from the day's official press release, organizer Brandy Cox writes about the reach of this special inaugural event. Cinemas and performance venues across the country are participating, including the National Museum of Asian Art in Washington, D.C., Film Forum in New York City, Chicago Film Archives, and Gene Siskel Film Center in Chicago, the Autry Museum of the American West in Los Angeles, Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, and the Washington Center for the Performing Arts in Olympia, Washington, amongst others, stated Brandy Cox. The celebration extends into online platforms too, with virtual talks, screenings, and a blogathon all scheduled or in the works. While those cities are doing really cool stuff and screening really cool movies, Hollywood is doing its own rad little street level event. And I mean literally street level. As part of the day's commemoration, Hollywood Heritage, a public benefit corporation that educates the public about the early film industry, its pioneers, and works to preserve historic sites in Hollywood, will dedicate and unveil a plaque and signage at the alley of Cuyahoga Boulevard and Cosmos Street in Hollywood as Chaplin Keaton Lloyd Alley, to honor the legacy of three great filmmakers of the silent era who filmed scenes at this location a century ago. The dedication of the alley is the premier hometown Hollywood event of the inaugural National Silent Movie Day. Why those three names, you may wonder? Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and Harold Lloyd are remembered as cornerstones of silent film comedy. They set a foundation for Hollywood to become the movie capital of the world, by each operating studios and producing their classic films within Hollywood. These stars in Hollywood grew world famous together. The designation of this site also pays tribute to Hollywood's unique cultural, social, and economic heritage. Now, I personally think it is so cool that they are making a Chaplin Keaton Lloyd Alley to commemorate a spot where they filmed many a scene. I am someone personally who super appreciates those connections between the past and the present. Whether you're walking around a fort that George Washington defended hundreds of years ago, or you're hanging out in an alley where Charlie Chaplin filmed a movie, just having those connections and knowing you're walking in the steps of something historic, of something memorable, of something huge, big event, just really means a lot to me, and I know it does to a lot of people out there. So it's just cool to get a kick out of knowing something cool was filmed, especially a movie, to know a movie was filmed on a spot where you're standing. It's a historical connection to something or someone that graced the big screen, and it's something that movies to this day, where I've been, where they filmed something, whenever I see that scene or that part, and I was actually there at a different time, obviously, but I still feel that like connection that I was there and that I feel a part of I feel the history, if you will. Suzanne Lloyd, on the other hand, granddaughter of the great silent film comedian who knows a thing or two about these historical places. She is the granddaughter of great silent film comedian and actor Harold Lloyd. She writes, "The cinematic legacy of silent films, including my grandfather's significant screen contributions, continue to provide new discoveries and delights even here in the 21st century. As part of the day, the fine historians and supporters at Hollywood Heritage will dedicate the Chaplin Keaton Lloyd Alley, a historic and iconic location in the heart of Hollywood where such classics as my grandfather's Safety Last, Chaplin's The Kid, and Keaton's Cops were filmed during the infancy of the motion picture industry. And TV channel Turner Classic Movies, which we all, I'm sure, know and love, will be running silent films all day on September 29th, which is really an amazing thing, because I can't tell you how many movies I never heard of, had no knowledge of, and tuned into Turner Classic and fell in love with. So it's cool that people who may not know that much about silent movies or know anything about them at all might tune in and learn that they love them. And I know as you listen to this, it's obviously past National Silent Movie Day on September 29th, 2021. Yes, Took me a second, but I eventually remembered the year. Um, it's just cool that they're embracing the day, they're embracing the history, and hopefully they're able to convert some new fans of this art form that we love so much. And I hope all of you out there got to celebrate it in your own way, got to watch a day's worth of movies on Turner Classic Movies. You got to be at a street commemoration. You got to be in a movie theater at a screening. Um, we just hope you got to spend it in the most silent film way possible. And if you want to tell us how you spent it, we would love that. We are very interactive on our social medias. Tell us what movies you watched. Tell us what you saw. Tell us what you did to celebrate National Movie Day. We would love to hear it. So now you want to know how we're celebrating National Movie Day, National Silent Movie Day. So at the home offices of the Golden Silence podcast, I remember putzing around the old internet here when I came across news of the announcement of National Silent Movie Day. When I saw that and saw the excitement and passion of everyone involved in this announcement, I knew our little show had to be there to experience it firsthand. As fans of silent film, the Golden Silence podcast was not going to miss this holiday. Our little show is just that little, and our knowledge of silent movies is not the most encyclopedic. But we wanted to be part of this awesome, awesome holiday. And by this time next year, our knowledge obviously, hopefully, possibly, maybe, will be a little deeper, and we can have a more meaningful contribution to National Silent Film Day. But for now, we were spectators. We were fans in the movie seats. And hopefully next National Silent Movie Day, like I said, we will have cool plans to partake in. And we will definitely do a special episode every day this year, every day of the year, September 29th. We will have a special Silent Movie Day episode, which is what this one is. And so as I was searching around the internet, I heard there was a screening here locally in Pittsburgh. I was sold on making it to the show. The movie that would be screened is Blackmail, Hitchcock's Blackmail, and the event would be set up by the aforementioned Chad Hunter and the Pittsburgh Silent Film Society. Just having a plain old screening would have been great, but to put the gravy on the mashed potatoes, it was going to have a live musical accompaniment. Pianist Tom Roberts was going to do an original composition for the film. And I've seen a lot of movies in a lot of theaters, but I've never seen a silent film with a live musical accompaniment. I have seen one movie with a musical accompaniment. That was Deep Red, with a live performance by Claudia Simonetti's Goblin, which was amazing to see the music live for such a great movie. But I've never seen a silent film with a live musical accompaniment. So I was super excited, as we all were here at the Golden Silence podcast. And this screening was going to be taking place in the Lawrenceville neighborhood of Pittsburgh at a place called Row House Cinemas. So we've talked about the event, the movie, the accompaniment, all that stuff. I would certainly be doing you fine listeners a disservice if I didn't tell you a bit about where all the action is going down. Like I said, this special screening of Hitchcock's Blackmail was being shown at one of the coolest places in the city of Pittsburgh, if not the country, to see a movie, and that's Row House Cinemas. Row House is a great film venue, and I've been there many times to watch a lot of awesome classic movies. This theater is an 84-seat single-screen theater in a historic loft building in the heart of Pittsburgh's Lawrenceville neighborhood. It is a super cool place with a wide variety of movies that they show. Sounds pretty rad, huh? When you see a movie there, you feel like it's a small, cozy movie house of old, but with some of the great local food and drinks and other modern amenities you expect. When you walk up to it and you see the movie you are there to see up on the marquee, you just get that vibe and that feeling that you are in for a great cinematic experience. And this is not advertising, this is nothing official. Just speaking as someone who loves the venue and loves watching movies there, I just want to spread the word and say what a cool place Row House Cinemas is. Now, though, with all the festivities of the day explained, let's talk about why we are here and why we love silent movies. It's about the movies, right? And this episode covers the second of the Hitchcock 9 to be featured on the Golden Silence podcast. These 9 films comprise Hitchcock's 9 surviving films of the silent era. If you want to hear a deep dive into another of the Hitchcock 9, tune into our episode on The Ring. For this Hitch flick, though, we will be talking about his 1929 classic, Blackmail. Now, Blackmail is a fascinating movie with a fascinating backstory. In fact, it started life on the stage. This film is based on the 1928 play of the same name by Charles Bennett. It premiered on February 28, 1928, and ran for 38 performances at the Globe Theatre in London's West End. In its original film inception, it was intended to be a silent film. But by the 20s, sound was starting to creep its way into cinemas of the world. But sound wasn't widespread enough to fully invest in Blackmail being all soundy and such, so it became a sort of hybrid film. They filmed it silent, but also filmed it at the same time with sound and dialogue. This way, they could send the sound version to the fewer sound-capable movie houses, while the silent version went to the theaters not yet equipped for sound. While having audio in the dawn of the talkie seems like a solid plan, it would certainly present some challenges. Lead actress Anny Ondra, who starred in the film as Alice, was raised in Prague and is now the Czech Republic. Like many actors and actresses in the silent film era, careers were changed with the advent of sound. With a heavy accent deemed unsuitable for film, drastic measures had to be taken. With sound filming in its infancy, technological limitations made it impossible to record and dub in another voice later. Anny Ondra was a great actress, so no way was the role being recast. So actress Joan Barry was hired to speak the dialogue off camera, while Ondra lip-synced her lines. This, while practical, I suppose this is one thing that led to some awkwardness when you watch the finished sound version. Speaking of Anny Ondra, let's take a look at our film's lead on a personal level. Anna Sofia Ondrakova was born on May 15, 1902 in Austria-Hungary, which is now Poland. She was into acting and theatrical pursuits from early on. She would enter the entertainment and film industry and gain popularity in Czech, Austrian, and German comedies in the 1920s. Her breakthrough role was in the 1920 film Jilly in Prague for the first time. This would lead to success in the Czech and Austrian comedies of the 20s, and it was German films like Eve's Daughters in 1928 and Sinful and Sweet in 1929 that made her a big name in Germany. As the late 20s came, Czech, Austrian, and German cinemas weren't the only place Ondra was making herself a star. England would beckon her and she would flourish. 1928 would bring 2 English productions starring Ondra. They were Glorious Youth and God's Clay. Her association with Alfred Hitchcock would take flight in 1929 with The Manxman and Blackmail. Overall, her career comprised of over 90 films, with the 1930s alone accounting for almost 40 of them, and of those whole 90, 20 were silents. Her final film was the Zurich engagement in 1957. On a personal side of things, an interesting note for all the sports fans out there. After a 3-year romance, on July 6, 1933, Ondra married German boxer Max Schmeling on July 6, 1933. Schmeling was the heavyweight champion of the world between 1930 and 1932. They stayed happily married until her death on February 28, 1987. Now that we've taken stock of National Silent Movie Day and Blackmail star Anny Ondra, how about we take a look at the filmic and narrative events of Alfred Hitchcock's 1929 film Blackmail? This film was released on October 6th, 1929, in case you were curious. But with all those formalities out of the way, let's take a look at the story, if you will. So, the film opens up with a montage sort of scene of policemen catching scoundrels and scallywags and various dirtbags and taking them back to New Scotland Yard to be booked and photographed and all that stuff. So, after a long, hard day of catching scoundrels and the aforementioned dirtbags, we meet Scotland Yard detective Frank Webber, played by John Longden. And we see him heading home before he is to take his girlfriend, Alice White, out on a date. Now, before we get too far, let's talk about this little trip home. This early part of the movie, we see Frank. I'm sorry, we see Frank on the London Underground. So at this early stage of the film, we get what at the time was a surprise cameo. That would be an appearance by the one and only Alfred Hitchcock. Blackmail would be his second cameo. His first came in The Lodger, a story of the London fog, in 1927. While his appearances would become world famous and much anticipated, they came from humble origins. The first one, in fact, was due to a lack of extras, so Hitchcock had to jump in for a brief scene that you don't even see his face in. This cameo in Blackmail is the first time we get to chat and dissect one of these cameos. The Ring, which we talked about super in depth a handful of episodes ago, was one of 13 movies to not have an appearance by Hitchcock. In fact, a good chunk of his silent films are Alfred free. So, back to the scene itself. As Frank is riding on the London Underground, Hitchcock, in the role of man with paper, I guess you could call him, is seated behind Frank, reading the aforementioned newspaper. But in a seat next to him is a mischievous child who refuses to let him read his paper in peace. As Frank sits, the child messes with Hitchcock's hat, and Hitchcock tells the mother to keep her kid under control. But it doesn't help much, and the kid sits there staring at the flustered Hitchcock. This was a great cameo by him. The facial expressions he makes actually cracked me up. I was laughing in the theater just looking at his facial expressions. It's by no means necessary or crucial to the story, but it's a fun moment in an otherwise tense and dramatic film. If you missed it or don't want to miss it, it's pretty tough to miss, actually, but it comes in around the 10-11 minute mark of the film when Harry is riding on the London Underground. But it's just interesting to know that this is one of the starts of one of the biggest traditions of the Hitchcock film, and this is the second time it happened, and it's actually a really, really cool one. So, like I said before, Frank was heading home to take his girlfriend Alice, played by Anny Ondra, to a super fancy exclusive tea house. While there, they have an argument, and Alice is being quite cagey. She seems to be having a secret meetup with another man that Frank doesn't know about. Not knowing that Alice's secrets and being quite upset over how the night has turned out, Frank storms out. While reconsidering his actions, he sees Alice leave with a Mr. Crewe, who was the mystery man I mentioned earlier. This Mr. Crewe is an artist, and the man she agreed to meet. Cyril Richard here is playing Mr. Crewe. Before we go too far and miss this chance, let's talk about this fella a bit, because he won't be in the movie very long, but it will be an impactful appearance. Cyril Richard, whilst having a very British name, was not in fact British. He was born Cyril Joseph Trimnell Richard on December 1st, 1897, in the Sydney, Australia suburb of Surrey Hills. In 1917, he would make his modest stage debut, and by 1919, he was beginning his long collaboration with Madge Elliott in the stage musical Going Up. As a team, they would perform in many musicals, mostly in Australia and London. With a stage partnership of over a decade and a half, they married in Australia in 1935. You may recognize Richard from some pretty notable roles and appearances. Though he had a long, illustrious resume on the stage, his signature role was Captain Hook in the original Broadway production of the musical Peter Pan in 1954, with Mary Martin in the title role. It was a role he won a Tony Award for and would reprise the role on several television broadcasts of the play. One of his final roles would be the Elf Lord Elrond in the Rankin Bass animated version of The Hobbit. He would pass away on December 18, 1977, due to the lingering effects of a heart attack. Now back to the movie. Crewe is able to convince a reluctant Alice into coming up to see his studio. Before they go into the building, Crewe goes off screen to talk to somebody. They go in, and Crewe's landlady tells him someone was calling him. 3 times, in fact, he called. This was super... This part that happens next, after the chat with the landlady, is a super, super cool shot and probably my favorite thing of the whole movie, which is to say something because it's a really good movie. The camera, in one shot, follows them up every flight of stairs in a single shot and just looks so damn cool. It just the way it was filmed. Hitchcock has a certain flair for the visual, and this is a good example of it. I just loved this shot so much. So as they get to the top of the stairs, as the two of them enter the studio, they get to the top of the stairs and enter the studio, Alice's attention is caught by a painting of a laughing clown. In general, most pictures of clowns tend to be creepy, and this one is no different. After a gander and glance at the creepy clown, Crew tries to charm Alice with an impromptu painting lesson. She uses his palette and brushes to paint a cartoonish drawing of a face. He adds a few strokes to make a naked feminine figure and guides her hand as they sign the picture with her name. He then gives her a dancer's outfit to wear for him. I guess, presumably to paint her portrait in, or do something creepy. Both, by the looks and acts of this guy, are both viable options, I must say. So Cruz, after she's changed and gets into this dress, Cruz steals a kiss, but this disgusts Alice. She starts to realize something is seriously wrong with this guy, and she is in a bad, bad spot. As she is changing and preparing to leave, he takes her dress from the changing area before she can put it back on. Next, he attempts to rape her as she cries for help. In desperation, Alice grabs a nearby bread knife and kills him, stabs him to death. As she leaves the studio, she angrily tears a hole in the painting of the laughing clown, then leaves after attempting to remove evidence of her presence in the flat. She paints over her name, gets all her clothes together, but like many a crime scene and many evidence like many a crime scene and many an evidence hider, she accidentally leaves something behind, something that ties her to the events. But at the time, she doesn't know it, so she runs out, leaving her gloves behind. After this part, she walks the streets of London. She is anxiety-ridden, guilt-ridden. Everything she sees reminds her of what just happened. She sees billboards and signs turn to knives. She sees people's arms and hands turn into the dead hand of Mr. Crew. And she eventually makes her way home by the next morning. But that morning, though, the body is found, and Frank of New Scotland Yard is assigned to the case. Before we get too far again, let's give our man Frank a bit of the spotlight. John Longden is the man who plays Frank. He was born on November 11th, 1900. In a career that spanned nearly 40 years, he would appear in 84 films. He also had a quite successful career on the stage as well. He would pass away in London on May 26th, 1971, at the ripe old age of 70. As Frank inspects the crime scene, he finds one of Alice's gloves. He also recognizes the dead man, having seen him with Alice the night before, but conceals both of these bits of evidence from his superiors. He sneaks the glove into his pocket before heading to see Alice at her father's tobacco shop, but she is too emotionally distraught to speak. The two of them make their way into the shop's phone booth to speak privately. As they discuss what happened the night before, a man named Tracy arrives. Tracy is played here by Donald Calthorpe. He was witnessing all kinds of things as he lurked about the night before. In fact, he had seen Alice go up to Crew's place, and he has her other glove. When he sees Frank with the other one, he attempts to blackmail them. First, his demands are for cigars and breakfast that her parents would make. And they give in, not wanting him to say what he saw. And they cover this up by saying he's a friend of Frank's. They tell Alice's parents, oh, he's just a friend of Frank's. That's why we were giving him this stuff, giving him a cigar, giving him breakfast. But Frank, though, soon gets a phone call from the police station and learns that Tracy is wanted for questioning. He was seen near the scene of the murder, and he has a criminal record. Frank sends for the policeman and tells Tracy he will pay for the murder. Alice is apprehensive, but still does not speak up. The tension mounts and soon hits a boiling point. That boiling point comes in the form of the arrival of the police. This turn of events causes Tracy's nerves to finally break, and he flees. The chase between Tracy and the Johnny Laws is a fun watch and really builds the tension up. This leads to the British Museum, where the chase continues, and this part is brilliant. This would be, I think from what I read, the first use of Hitchcock using a big set piece or chase at a famous landmark. This is something the director would return to throughout his career. In his film review for Variety, David Parkinson talks a bit about how some of the visuals of this remarkable chase scene inside the famous British Museum went down. In his 2006 review, he writes, "The sequence was achieved using the Schuftian process, which Hitchcock had probably first seen on his sojourn in Germany, and which allowed live action to be combined with paintings and or models via a mirror placed at a 45-degree angle to the lens. And it instigated a fascination with technology that would enable the master of suspense to keep conducting visual experiments to the end of his career. The visuals alone of this chase through the museum are fantastic and worth watching. They are fantastic in 2021, so I can only imagine what the audiences thought way back in 1929. You can feel the excitement and anxiety as they tear through the museum and eventually make their way to the domed roof of the reading room. As Tracy hits the highest point, he slips, causing him to go crashing through the domed skylight and falling to his death. With his death, the police assume and conclude that he was the murderer. With Alice left behind during the chase, she is unaware of the turn of events and the death of the police number one suspect. And the anxiety and guilt build and build within Alice. When it hits its limit, she feels compelled to give herself up and goes to see the chief inspector at New Scotland Yard. As she enters the office, she sees Frank is already there talking to the chief inspector about the chase and subsequent, no pun intended, fallout. Before she can confess to him, the chief inspector receives a telephone call and asks Frank to deal with Alice. She finally tells Frank the truth, that it was self-defense against an attack she cannot bear to speak of, and they leave together. As they do, a policeman walks past, carrying the damaged painting of the Laughing Clown and a cartoon canvas where Alice painted over her name. And that is how the movie ends. So as the movie itself wraps up, it is only right, I suppose, to talk about what I thought about this movie and maybe hear from a posthumous good friend of the program. So let's start with what I thought. I love this movie. It's as my second foray into Hitchcock Silence, I found myself more and more in love with silent Hitchcock films. I especially dig the visuals that Hitchcock gives us. From his transitions to big action-packed chases, he certainly has his own distinct visual flair. And one of the things I've noticed in my time with Hitchcock on this silent side of the ledger is how real and authentic his worlds feel. You can tell he is filming scenes outside in the real world. You can feel that hustle and bustle of life in the city. A lot of movies at this time feel manufactured, feel closed in. They're filmed on sets. They're filmed on weirdly built things, I guess you could say. But Hitchcock's feel like they just went out in the middle of the day in a real city and just filmed, which I think is really cool, adds to the immersion. And I just love that with Hitchcock, you can get a big lived-in world. From cars to crowds on the street, you get it, you feel it, and it makes it feel a lot more authentic. And as I mentioned earlier, I adored the earlier scene of Alice and Mr. Crewe walking up the stairs. It was gorgeous, and the smoothness of it definitely got my attention. It also served up to build that tension and that anxiety. You knew something was going to happen, and that long walk up the stairs really, really let it percolate. But I also can't leave this review without mentioning and praising Tom Roberts' live performance of his original score. It was wonderful. It was so perfectly fitting to the movie that I found myself forgetting that someone with a piano was sitting a few rows in front of me. Roberts has quite a bit of experience composing original scores for silence and sound, and it was put to great use for this screening. In fact, his score was so good and well received, the Pittsburgh Silent Film Society is already planning an encore presentation of Blackmail, with Roberts again providing his live original score. Now, if you would like to learn more about Tom Roberts, I highly encourage you to stop by tomrobertspiano.com. That's www.tomrobertspiano.com. You can learn about the music Tom arranged and performed for the Martin Scorsese film The Aviator, as well as his extensive jazz background. At the end of the day, though, I'm just a guy with a podcast. Let's take a moment to hear from a professional movie reviewer. And with that, let's welcome back our favorite film review curmudgeon, Mordaunt Hall of the New York Times. While he overall enjoyed the film and the performance of the actors and actresses, he had this to say about Alfred Hitchcock's direction of the film in the October 7th, 1929 edition of the New York Times. Our buddy Mordaunt says this: "The photography is seldom up to American standards, for the director Alfred Hitchcock frequently fails to see that his scenes are adequately lighted, and more often than not the images do not stand out as distinctly as they might if more attention had been paid to the shading of the interior walls." Well, I'm no film scholar. I would have to disagree. He does such cool work with shadows and stuff like that. But that's why we love Mordaunt Hall here on the Golden Podcast so much, and it is so good to finally have a review of his back. So, as we lay this episode to rest, it is time to find out where your favorite silent stars are laid to rest. This is the segment where we join our favorite matinee idols on the other side of the cemetery gates. The history, the art, the celebrity, spectacle of cemetery exploration converge, and where are they now? Your guide to paying your respects to the film stars that have entertained us so much over the years. For this trip to the cemetery, we are going international once again. Anny, Ondra, the star of Blackmail, died on February 28, 1987, at the age of 84. She passed away in Hallenstadt, Germany, and that is also where she would be laid to rest. She is buried in the St. Andreas Friedhof Cemetery in the aforementioned Hallenstadt, Germany. Her husband, boxing champ Max Schmeling, passed away in 2005 at the age of 100 and was buried next to his wife. The two share a headstone, in fact. So we will definitely post some pictures of the cemetery and the gravesite for all of you listeners. They will be available across all of the Golden Silence podcast social media outlets. So please, as you listen to this, hit up those sites. We're going to have some cool Blackmail-centric information for you, and Anny Ondra's gravesite will be one of those things. And with that, it is officially time to adjourn for this episode of the Golden Silence podcast. Before we go our separate ways, get your notepads and pencils ready. We have a lot of cool info to leave with you before we hit the road. For more great info regarding National Silent Movie Day, do yourself a solid and please check out nationalsilentmovieday.org, www.nationalsilentmovieday.org. If you missed it this year, we here at the Golden Silence hope you can participate and share your love of silent film next year. And don't feel you have to wait a year. You can do it every day you want. And on next year, September 29th. If you are in or around the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania region, head to Facebook, do a little search in the search bar for the Pittsburgh Silent Film Society, and give them a like so you can stay up to date with all the cool silent film related events they put on. Lots of good news and info about screenings, about events. So do check that out, like them, and follow them if you are in the area. Even if you're not and you just want to see some cool stuff with other people who love silent film, do give it a like. And once more, I just want to repeat www.tomrobertspiano.com so all of you great listeners can check out all of his news, upcoming projects, and a lot of other cool info about this talented musician. Last but not least, remember to hop on Instagram and join us at Golden Silence Cast, and find us on Twitter at Golden Silence 1. That is at Golden Silence and the number 1. Let us know what you thought of this flick. Have you ever been to a film screening with a live musical accompaniment? Let us know on our social pages. We love hearing from you. I want to hear your stories. How did you spend National Silent Movie Day? What cool stuff did you do? What movies did you watch? Also, if you listen to the program on Apple iTunes or Apple Podcasts, like I said earlier, please rate and review our show. Also, subscribe so you get the episodes right when they first come out. All of this, rating, reviewing, leaving comments, it helps our podcast on a bunch of different levels. We want to hear how our show is doing. We want to hear if we're doing good stuff. We want to hear if we're doing bad stuff. We want to hear what movies you want us to cover in the future, what actors, what actresses, what directors. We want to hear all of that, and we want to know how we can improve the show for all of you, because we love doing this and we want to put out the best possible show. So please like, rate, review, the whole 9 yards. We greatly appreciate it. And once again, thanks again to all of you fine listeners for all of your fine listening. And remember, the silents are golden, and the talkies, they're just a fad. To stay up to date with everything going on in the world of National Silent Movie Day, check them out on Twitter at Silent Movie Day. And do please check out their website at www.nationalsilentmovieday.org and show your support to this cinematic super day.